What's up, everyone? Dr. Jacob Wilson here. Hey, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the question, what's the optimal rep zone to gain muscle, right? Just straightforward muscle growth. What is it 8 to 12? Is it 12 to 15? Is it 20? Is it 5? What is the best rep range to gain muscle? By the end of this lecture, you're going to understand just that. But hey, listen, before we get into this, if you are already subscribed to the channel and you like this video, hit a like. That'll help the YouTube algorithm. But listen, also if it's your first time on the channel and you really like this content, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. It's the best thing you can do for us. So listen, today we're going to get into that topic again. What is the best rep range for growth? Now listen, Dr. Charlie Ottinger and I actually did a whole podcast on this, an in-depth perspective on it. I'd encourage you to check that out. We'll put that in the feed. But for today, I'm kind of going to go over, we're going to start to actually do kind of lectures to you about in-depth topics and what the science is behind them. So when we talk about reps for muscle growth, you see so many bodybuilders have grown or gotten big from a variety of rep ranges. Like Serge Nubret, for example, as you've seen, I have a tendency to talk about bodybuilders from the 70s. But Serge Nubret, the guy would do 20 sets of 20 with 210 pounds on bench press. And he preached. I remember watching the old ESPN videos of him. And if you followed him on some of the websites and forums, he was against lifting heavy, right? He liked lifting in the 20 repetition range. Sometimes more, wouldn't drop much below 15. Then you look at Franco Columbu, and he might do like your classic old school strength reverse pyramid. He might go a set of 15, a set of 12, a set of 8, and then finish with a set of 4, right? And of course, Franco could bench press 525. He could squat over 600 pounds and deadlift over 700 pounds. Two totally different guys, both of them champions, you know, both of them won the Mr. Universe several times. And of course, guys like Tom Platz, a huge variety of reps. So you see a massive variation. You have old school powerlifters who most of their reps are sets of 5, right? And you can't say they're not big, right? So what's going on here? What I'm going to do is bring you back to the old school kind of classic thought process here. And that is what we learned in school and why. So let's talk about some physiology and what I learned in school. What I will tell you, what I'm pulled in a direction of, you know, you have to understand, when you were trained in a certain area for 15 years, you want to get pulled in that direction, okay? But what I'm going to do is tell you what the current consensus is today about reps. At the end, I'm going to give you some considerations. But let me go to the consensus when I was going to school. It's based on motor unit recruitment, right? So if you look at a graph, you look at muscle fibers. You have small muscle fibers, maybe medium-sized muscle fibers, maybe large muscle fibers, okay? We call that what? Slow twitch and fast twitch, okay? Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. The size principle basically says that the more force I produce, the greater the amount of, or the larger and larger muscle fibers I recruit. So if you're going to recruit fast twitch muscle fibers, you start really recruiting them after 60% of your 1RM, I mean like to a high level, you know, and it might start to somewhat plateau at around 85% of your 1RM, right? And then maybe after that, there's other mechanisms that you're getting them to fire more. Now, the point is, scientists looked at this and go, well, if you're going to recruit the largest muscle fibers, the ones you really want to grow, you need to lift in a 60 to 85% range. ACSM said that the threshold for strength and growth was like 60% of your 1RM. So what we thought was like, and then, well, why does it cap around 85%? Because of volume, for volume purposes, right? Yeah, maybe if I do 1 rep, I can maximally lift, activate my muscles, the larger muscles, but it's only 1 rep. So my volume's not as high. And when I'm talking about volume, I mean number of reps. So, and that basically puts you in a range of anywhere from 6 repetitions to 15 repetitions. You know, you've also probably heard 8 to 12 repetitions but let's broaden it out to a lot of definitions. What I came up in the day, 6 to 15. There are other reasons why people think this is a sweet spot for muscle growth, because basically that's when testosterone peaks, that's when metabolic stress peaks like lactic acid. All of these things seem to peak at around 6 to 12. So volume, the weight you're lifting, how many muscle fibers you're recruiting, the hormonal response, the metabolic response, peaks around this sweet spot. So what we say, if you look at textbooks, NSCA textbook, you'll see they go, well, for your sweet spot for muscle growth, 6 to 15, some people say 8 to 12. So are we on the same page before we move on? Does that make sense? In my day, we'd walk away, okay? But I'm going to update you on some of the new research that's come out and tell you what some of the consensus is today. Okay. What we said was that force, meaning how much weight I lift, drives the muscle fibers that you recruit. If you don't recruit a muscle fiber, you're not going to grow. Okay, that's the basic thing. We said 6 to 12, 15 repetitions maximizes that. That's based on load. Now, but are there other things that make me tap into muscle fibers that are larger? The answer is yes. When we talk about intensity, I said 60 to 85% intensity. I'm talking about relative to your 1 repetition maximum. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you could lift 100 pounds, that is 60 to 85 pounds, right? So that's a percentage of your maximal output. This study looked at 40% of your intensity. So if you lift 100 pounds, you'd be lifting with 40. And they just had them go to failure. And they looked at the time it took them to go to failure. And we were looking at the beginning of the sets, they weren't recruiting much muscle. But as they got near 80, 90, 100% intensity or time before failure, muscle fiber recruitment started going up and up, okay? And they're basically looking at muscle activity here. So they're using something called EMG. We've used that in our lab. You can look at the activity of the muscle. Even though they're really lightweight, when they went near failure, you saw muscle fibers went up in recruitment. Why is that the case? Because if I'm using a lightweight, I'm using smaller muscle fibers. But eventually, if I keep lifting, if I do 20, 30 reps with that, those smaller muscle fibers get too tired to sustain the load. So your body's forced to use heavier or stronger muscle fibers for something they normally wouldn't be used for, lighter weight. Does that make sense? So this tells us as scientists, if you do a lot of reps and you come near failure, you actually can recruit larger muscle fibers. This enters us into a new era of what is the best reps for muscle growth. Let's get into a new theory. The new theory is the failure theory in muscle growth, which is as long as you near failure, you can lift in any rep range. Now, Charlie and I go in more into depth in this, and I would suggest you watch that podcast on effective reps. But the main thing is, as long as you near failure, you can lift in any rep range. That's kind of what a new theory is. I'm not telling you this is right. I'm telling you this is the new theory that's today, okay? You make the decision. You make the call at the end. So basically what you're looking at here is people tested this theory. This is a lab actually out of Sao Paulo, and it was a study that was done in 2018. And what they did was they looked at the elbow flexor, more like the biceps, and they looked at the quads. So they had people basically train at a variety of rep ranges to failure over 12 weeks. So what they had them lift at 20% of their 1RM to failure for, say, like 3 sets, 40%, 60%, and 80%. Again, let's say that you can lift 100 pounds on curls, then you'd lift 20 pounds. One group would lift 20 pounds, one group 40, one group 60, one group 80. All of them went to failure, okay? Then they looked what happened with muscle growth. If you look at the quads and the biceps, what you ended up seeing is that the 20% increase, they increased about 10%, 8 to 10% in muscle growth, but that the 40%, 60%, 80% all grew around the same, and it was about 2.5 times more muscle growth than they did at 20%. So what this is telling us is what? What's the main conclusion? At the you can gain muscle at 20% 1RM, but not much. But once you cross a certain threshold, which I'll talk about what that is in a minute, like when they hit 40% of their 1RM, 60%, 80%, as long as they were going to failure, they all made the same gains. So from here, people started coming out and saying, hey, as long as you're nearing failure or you come to failure, as long as you're at 40% 1RM to 80%, you're going to make the same gains. You guys follow me? Okay. Now, the thing is, if you're at 40% of your 1RM, you might be 30 reps. You might be 40 reps, depending on who you are. Whereas if you're 80% of your 1RM, you might be 6 reps. You might be 7 reps, 8 reps. Okay? If you're at 60%, maybe you're at 15 reps. You notice that the repetition scheme is wide. Based on this study, you can't say 8 to 12, 6 to 15, because here you're talking about anywhere from like 8 to 40 reps, right? So it doesn't make it fit in this box, like I like to put it, like I was educated, of 6 to 15. You guys follow me? If we stepped away from this, we'd have a new update and go, hey, as long as you're above 40%, 40, 80%, doesn't matter the rep range as long as you come near failure. Okay, well, that's what people said. Now, the next study I'm talking about, well, what about 30%? And basically, this is looking at a study that was done by Mitchell, and it was done actually back in 2012, and they compared 30% to failure versus 80% to failure, 3 sets. Again, they noticed the same amount of growth in the quads, and it was around 6.8 to 7.2%. So we can say here, if you're going from 30% to 80, 85%, as long as you're coming near failure, that it's more the fact that you're coming near failure that's driving the gains, okay? And again, these are what these studies are suggesting. I'm going to tell you my conclusions at the end. The next question is, do I have to go to failure, okay? Do I have to go to failure is the real question. And if so, how close to failure? So this is a study that we did, I think back in 2014, and we did what's called cluster set training. So we had one group do 4 sets of squats, and we did this with Jordan Joy. Jordan Joy is like, he's a monster. You know, the guy, he's a monster. He reminds me a lot more like of Charlie, except Charlie, he's great with people, but he'd love to be able to just train alone. Jordan Joy hates being around people. And absolute monster. Squats over 500 pounds. I mean, just a beast. Well, Jordan, again, he got his master's with me, and this was one of the projects he did. Jordan didn't like being around people, and he took it out on them when he did studies. So this is like, these were actually well-trained people, and he pushed them. People were throwing up. When you do 4 sets of 10, he had them on a clock, and many people threw up. He trained people and studies how he should. But anyway, he does one, we looked at muscle activation. In one group, you have 4 sets of 10, and the other group, we paused in the middle. After 5 reps, we had a 1-minute pause to stop them from going to failure. Okay, and these were well-trained guys, so they got pretty well recovered after that minute. So imagine you can do 10 reps, probably you could do 12 reps, you stop at 5, and then you rest a minute. If they were doing 4 by 10, they were coming pretty damn near failure by the time they hit the set 2. So we looked at muscle activation, and what do we see? Well, if you look at this graph, you see one group goes from 0 to 10 reps, muscle activation keeps going up and up and up and up. And the group that rested 1 minute between, you saw when they rested that when they came back to rep 1, muscle activation was low. It was almost like at the beginning of the set. And by the time it got to rep 10, it never fully recovered. So by stopping them from going to failure by 5 reps, they never really, they only got 50% of the muscle activation they would have gotten had they gone all the way to 10. So here we say that going up to 5 reps it's an effective stimulus, but it wasn't a maximal stimulus for growth. And that pans out. That was our study showing that. But there's another study where they basically had a cluster set training. That's what we were doing, was cluster set. And they basically had one group go to failure. So 3 to 5 sets of 10 reps versus 3 to 5 sets of 10, but they had a break on the 5th rep, just like we did. So again, they stopped them from going to failure. They had a break on the 5th rep, and they looked at muscle growth. And what you saw is that muscle growth, when they went to near failure, was almost triple when they didn't stop short of 5 reps. Like they were breaking on the 5th rep. So when they didn't stop short at 5 reps, they made a little bit of growth, maybe 4% change. When they went all the way to failure, they had like 12% growth. So when we're going to say this, when we talk about effective reps, we think about a range. The entry point into that range is probably 5. Okay? Again, we're talking about muscle growth, not strength. That's a different topic, which is related, but it's not today's topic. So we're going to say the entry point into reps before failure is probably 5. You're not going to optimize growth. Maybe it might be 1/3 of the growth is if you went to failure, but you're going to get some growth. So that entry point before failure is probably 5 reps. So next, basically what I'm talking about, this is a study from the same lab out of Sao Paulo, and again published in 2018. They basically looked at 80% of your 1RM versus 30% of your 1RM, and I'm going to cluster the groups into failure versus 1 to 2 reps before failure. And they looked at muscle growth. And what you saw is that the group that stopped at 1 to 2 reps before failure versus failure made the same amount of gains in muscle growth. So basically they're making the same amount of gains in muscle growth. So what this tells us is that the entry point's 5 reps, but if you're within 1 to 2 reps of failure, you're probably going to get close to the same amount of growth, if not the same amount of growth, as a group that's coming near failure. Okay? So what I'm saying is that your effective rep range is 5 to failure. 5 to failure. Okay? And what's that look like? Here's kind of a graph talking about the return on gains when you're coming close to failure. So when you're looking basically here, you make some gains with the stimulus for growth is there at 5, but when you move from 5 to 4, it goes up a lot. From 4 to 3, it goes up a lot. And from 3 to 2, it goes up a little bit. And from 2 to failure, it goes up a little, not that much. So your gains are going to come from that 5 to probably 2 to 3, and then you start to plateau off. So does that make sense? How do I factor that in to my actual training? What you want to kind of think about is this relationship between reps, stimulus, and fatigue. So there's a model on periodization called the fitness fatigue model, and it basically says that our gains is the mathematical addition and subtraction of fitness and fatigue. So when you train, I have a stimulus to gain muscle, but I also have fatigue. And if I have a high stimulus to gain muscle, but my fatigue's so high and I can't recover from the fatigue, you subtract that fatigue from the muscle growth and I don't get as much muscle growth. Does that kind of make sense? If fatigue's so high I can't recover from it, even though the stimulus to grow is high, I don't grow as much. So you kind of see somewhat of a very elongated inverted U. So basically what I mean by that is like, hey, at 5 reps, I have a lower stimulus, or my ratio of stimulus to growth and fatigue is not super high. At around 2 to 3 reps, the ratio of stimulus to grow to fatigue is at its probably at its peak. Some might argue 1 to 3 reps, but let's say 2 to 3. The stimulus to grow relative to fatigue is pretty high. And then as I near failure, I might have a really high stimulus for growth, but my fatigue's so high that the ratio between the two is not as high, right? So the main thing is, what it's telling us that your sweet spot might be 2 to 3 reps on shorter failure on most of your sets, not all of them. There is a place for failure, okay? So let's talk about what that kind of looks like. So our review is probably your threshold for growth, probably optimal growth is anywhere between 30 and 85% of your 1RM. I'm telling you a consensus as a general sweet spot for muscle growth. Why do I put a cap at 85%? Because that's probably around close to your 5 RM. So I'm sticking within that effective rep range. The second reason is there's other ways muscle grows. One is your mind-muscle connection. When you get past 85%, I don't know about you guys, but if 90% of my 1RM, I'm not thinking about how my biceps are feeling. I'm not putting my mind in my chest. I'm thinking it's 90%. Lord, help me get this weight off my chest, okay? And I'm not thinking about, oh, I wonder if I'm focusing on my pecs. the mind-muscle connection kind of goes out, and there's studies supporting that. And that's important for muscle growth, and your metabolic stress and your volume's not as high. So that's why we say 30 to 85%. Some of you may argue with me, and that's fine. I'm not saying that above 85% is not important for muscle growth. I'm talking about a sweet spot. Here's the considerations that you need to have, and you need to take this with a grain of salt because studies aren't straightforward. Number one, the durations of the study are short. They're 12 weeks long. So what it's basically saying is, let's say you take a guy like Charlie, okay? Charlie is strong as hell compared to your normal population, okay? And let's say we're going to look at his quads. And if Charlie lifts heavy, he's lifting 80% of his 1RM for 12 weeks. If you could take another 12 weeks and you have him lift at 40% of your 1RM, one, he's going to hate you, okay? But two, you need to understand that it's a new stimulus for Charlie. If he's training at 40% of his 1RM for, for sets of 30 and 40, that's novel enough to where over that 12 weeks time, it may be equated with the 80%. Okay, that's something to take into consideration. The duration of these are 12 weeks. We cannot, over your entire training career, say 12 weeks is how. You can't look at this literature and go, man, screw that. I don't need to train above 50% of my 1RM to reach my max genetic potential. I can tell you right now, you will not. And I'll talk to you about that in a case. But I'm saying over a period of time, within a workout, you can get a growth stimulus between 30 to 85% of your 1RM close to failure. I think that's the message I'm going to give you right now. If you think you can train below 50% of your 1RM based on these very okay studies for the rest of your life and you're going to reach maximal growth, I can virtually guarantee you will not. Secondly, training status. The majority of these studies, all the Brazil studies I showed you, they're untrained people. Some of them use trained subjects. And when I say trained, I put quotation marks around that. So if you're highly trained, if I were to take Charlie, for example, who was highly trained and very strong, and I were to have him start training, but 50% of his 1RM below for the next 3 years, here's what I would predict. Over 12 weeks, I think he would gain muscle initially. I think that if you look over 3 years, he'd lose muscle. I think the key thing to understand is that I think load is still important. Load and tension are still important for growth, and progressive overload, meaning I need to get stronger within a given rep range, is still important to driving future growth. So that's why I think a variety of rep ranges is very important, and that variety of rep ranges will be dictated by your goals, okay? And then the last thing I'm going to say is the efficiency of training. If you go over to Charlie's and I podcast, he quoted his old coach who basically said, like, dude, man, look, if I go in there, all I know is this. If I pick up 80% of my 1RM and I can be done with it in 3 sets of 6 to 7 reps, I might have been more efficient with my time than picking 50% of my 1RM and doing 30, 40 reps, right? So you need to consider efficiency of time into play. But I think the principles I told you, as long as you take them with that grain of salt, you can apply them. Let's talk about another concept, which is ratio of rep ranges and muscle and strength. How you ratio out your goals is going to be dependent, or your rep ranges and the ratio that you use them is going to be based on your overall goals. Say you're a bodybuilder and your main goal is muscle, but you know what? You like going in and you want to be able to bench 315. Or you want to be able to squat some weight. You might not be saying, hey, I'm going to be a pro power lifter, but strength is important to you. So for that, you're going to need some strength lifting. You need to lift probably at least 20% of the time, above 85%, so you can still be used to heavier weight. If you're not doing that, you're not going to have a very strong 1RM. It's not going to be maximized for what you're doing. Maybe 40% of your time you spend between 60 and 85%, and maybe 40% of your time you spend below 60%. Now, realize the further you go below 60%, the more it's going to take away from your goal of having a combination of strength and size. Okay? So that's an example of how you might balance the ratio if you're interested in muscle and you want to be strong at the same time. I'm not talking about pure strength. That's another lecture. Okay, now, let's just say you're less concerned about strength and you just want to gain muscle. Well, maybe you split up your rep ranges 33, 33, 33, 33. 33% of the time, 70, 85%. 33% of the time 50 and 70%, 33% of the time between 30 and 50%, or maybe even 20% of the time between 30 and 50%. As you can see, you may have a more balanced range. You are not going to be as strong on this. When I was more training for like pure bodybuilding myself and not powerlifting is probably what I adopted. I never really went over 85%, and I can tell you I was not very strong. I wasn't very strong. But I could train at 85% for a high amount of reps, way higher than the predicted equation, okay? And I can handle a lot of volume. So this is going to train you to be able to handle a lot of volume. You might be able to train for 2 hours without getting fatigued, and you have a balance of muscle, but you're not going to be super strong. Now, if you're getting to the point where, like, say, maybe where I'm at, or say you talk about my dad, joints are going to be a big concern for you, and you're out of the strength game now, and you just want to have good amount of muscle. You're worried about your joints. It's a real factor because you powerlifted maybe before. 20% of your time you might be 60 to 70% of your 1RM. 40% you might be 50 to 60% of your 1RM. 40% you might be 30 to 50%. This is the range that I fall probably around because my joints are they have taken a beating. Okay? Here you're going to see your joints heal, and I'm going to tell you from personal experience, you're going to get muscle gain. You're probably not going to optimize it long term for the reasons I talked to you about with Charlie. You take him, you put him on 12 weeks on something like this, he might make gains, but long term over 3 years, I don't think it's going to optimize muscle growth. But if you're going through a joint recovery cycle, or I'm out of the game, my joints are shot, and I still want to have a good physique, here's a good range for you. I think one of the main things to kind of understand is more like kind of an 80-20 rule when you're talking about reps in reserve, or we call them effective reps. We said effective reps are coming close to failure within a 5-rep range. 80% of the time, it might be around 2 to 3 reps. 20 to 25% of the time, you're going to fall in that failure range, okay? That's your sweet spot. So again, 80% of your time might be around 2 to 3 reps. 20 to 25% might be around the 0 to 2 range. If you're a beginner and you're just starting training, you might be able to fall in the higher range, 4 or 5 reps, or on a recovery day, maybe 4 to 5 reps, right? But I'm just saying this is a general rule. I'm going to give you, the last thing I'm going to give you is that you can actually progress using effective reps. So for example, let's just say that we always talk about progressing by just adding weight. You can also progress by progressing into effective rep zone. So let's say, for example, whatever zone you're training in, whether it's 50% of your 1RM, 80% of your 1RM, 70% of your 1RM, you're counting effective reps. You know, the more experience you have, I bet you can say, like, Fernando's filming this, if he gets underneath a bench and he's lifting, he probably can tell you, I only have 5 reps left. And he's probably going to be 95% accurate because he has enough training experience, okay? So on week 1, you might start off light and you go, okay, I'm going to come within 4 to 5 reps on all of my sets of going to failure. On week 2, you might progress up and go 3 to 4 reps with the same weight, close to failure. Week 3, you might come within 2 to 3 reps, and week 4, you're coming within 0 to 2, meaning you're coming to failure, close to failure, or at failure by week 4. Week 5, you repeat that, but you're going to go up in weight. Maybe you progress 2 to 3, 5%, depending on how well trained you are. You're going to progress up in weight and start to cycle over. This is a way to progress using effective reps. I'm not saying it's the best method of all time, but I'm saying it's a method you could try for a 4 to 8 week cycle. So again, guys, just summarizing this up, I'm an old school type of guy. If you ask me 3 in the morning, what's the best reps for muscle growth, I'm gonna tell you 8 to 12, or maybe some mornings, if I was out, if I had one too many drinks, I might say 6 to 15. You don't know, okay? That's my default, that's my training. I will tell you, if you look at meta-analyses and you really analyze those like effect sizes, I still think it favors age 12, okay? You can talk statistics all you want, I think it still favors that. But I'm gonna step back and say, if you look at a lot of studies over 12 weeks times in relatively untrained people, it tells us that there is a wider range that we can use. And that range starts at a threshold of 30% of your 1RM to maybe 85% of your 1RM. As many reps as you can go in that range, until you hit that effective rep range of 5. Your sweet spot, 80-20 rule, you're gonna stick around maybe 2 reps, 3 reps. 20-25% of the time, you're gonna come close to failure. You can use a progressive scheme, but I want you to remember this. Remember this. If you are gonna reach your maximal potential, you are gonna have to get stronger, at least within the 60-85% range. If you think that like, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm just gonna train I'm gonna train with pink dumbbells below 50%, because that's what you're gonna have to select when you go to the rack. I'm gonna select pink dumbbells when I go below 50% of my 1RM. If you stay at that, you're gonna get initial spurt of growth, and I would predict, based on a lot of knowledge and a lot of studies I can pull out in my mind, putting the pieces together, over a year's time, I think you'll lose muscle. So make sure you periodize that all in one. So I know there's a long-winded answer what the optimal growth range is. I will see you next time.